Now, we're all gathered together to hear Lorraine, and she's standing there looking confident and expansive. And I will now let her speak.
Thank you, Anthony. I hope it wasn't my waistline you were talking about when you said I was looking expansive. Anyway, first of all, just to say how delighted I am to be here at this conference and having the opportunity to talk to you all. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about the changing role of the Library Consortium in the UK as we see this year the implementation of policies requiring that all UK academics in all disciplines publish research outputs in open access. Now, the funder policies we have in the UK have implications for all the stakeholders, for the funders themselves, for publishers, and for the universities. And within universities, the impact is quite far-reaching. Libraries are impacted, the academics, of course, are impacted, but so do our other groups within the university that we haven't really had many dealings with before, and we suddenly find ourselves talking to research managers, institutional repository managers, and even the finance managers and directors within universities. So as I say, these policies have quite far-ranging effects. But as I say, this presentation will be very much the view not of those other stakeholders, but of the Library Consortium as the policies change our role and as our member libraries expect new and different things from us. Some of you yesterday may have heard Brandon Norden from ACS in his presentation, and he remarked that not all markets move at the same pace in the transition to open access. Now, that's certainly true of the UK in relation to gold open access, author pays open access. Because of the policies of our funders and our government, we are really at the leading edge, shall we say, of this transition to gold open access. And I was discussing this actually over lunch with Bruce Hetterick, some of you may know him. And he said, oh, yes, you're in the vanguard, Lorraine, in the UK. Now, that either means the UK is going to be an exemplar of best practice, or you're going to show everybody else how not to do it. So we're not quite sure at this stage which it's going to be. But I hope this will give you a flavour of what is going on in the UK. First, a little bit of background about JISC, who we are and what our role is. In the UK, JISC is a nationally funded organisation for the academic community. And we have a number of roles. We have a technology division, which provides the academic network, the JANET network, and is also responsible for implementing and providing our identity access system. We have a futures division which looks at new technologies and emerging standards. And then there is my division, or I should say our division, because it's pertinent to all of us in this room, which is digital content and resource discovery. As a library consortium, Jisc Collections, that's the name of our library consortium, serves all the universities in the UK, all our further education colleges. They are like the community colleges that you have here in the US. And we also have some skills and training providers that we support. Sorry, lost track of my slides there. So Jisc Collections as a library consortium, again, we have a number of roles. We provide our academic community with digital content, what we call heritage collections, digital archives. And our aim there really is to provide those archives at very low or at no cost. We also provide a number of shared services to support libraries. We have a service called JISC, the Journals Usage Statistics Portal, a one-stop shop for library counter statistics. And some of you may have heard of our new service, which we launched this year, KB+, providing open data to knowledge bases and to libraries. But our main task, our core mission, is to negotiate with vendors on behalf of our member libraries. And we really have a very wide range of license agreements that we negotiate for them. Databases, e-books, multimedia, the whole range of digital resources that can support research and learning and teaching. But most important, and what our members always tell us is the most important task, the highest priority, or they have up to now, it's slightly changed as I'll get to, but up until now the highest priority has been to negotiate the big deal with the leading journal publishers and to get the best deal that we can on behalf of our community. So that has been our top priority, our top focus for many years. So we were going along merrily, negotiating our journal deals and our other consortial deals. But in 2012, our landscape changed dramatically. And the requirements and demands from our community have changed dramatically as a result. So two things happened. The first is that a report was published, and I'm going to talk about this at some length, so I'll come back to it, the Finch report. And shortly following the publication of that report, our funders, the funders of research in the UK, announced mandates, funded mandates for open access. So, big game changer, a lot has happened. So, the Finch report. This report was a report commissioned by the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills. This is a government department in the UK. You might note that this department is responsible both for the university sector and for the business sector. So both universities and publishers, UK publishers anyway, fall within the remit of this government department. The minister in charge, David Willits, is very, very keen on open access. He sees the open agenda as a way of stimulating business and so on. So he's very, very pro. And he commissioned somebody called Dame Janet Finch to put together a committee of all the stakeholders to discuss how access to research publications could be expanded across the UK, for the benefit of society and business innovation. So it is quite important to understand that the committee that was behind the Finch report had representation from the funders, research funders, from universities, and from publishers. And I must say, Janet Finch, I think, did a very good job in bringing those, quite diverse stakeholders together who had, quite diverse opinions together in order to agree a report with 10 recommendations. Now, the 10 recommendations are in these rather dense slides. You will be pleased to know I am not going to read them word for word. But I will point to you a few of the recommendations because you'll see what sort of implications they have later on when I talk about our changing role. So the first recommendation, and perhaps the most important, is support for publication in open access or hybrid journals funded by article processing charges, APC charges. So as you see here, a very pro-gold open access approach. It's not to say the report doesn't think that there should be green open access, but there is a very strong push for gold. That the research councils, these are the councils in the UK that fund a great deal of the research that happens in the sector, should establish more effective and flexible arrangements to meet the cost of publishing in open access and hybrid journals. And the final one on this slide, which is also important to note, that open access publications should be accompanied by policies to minimize restrictions on the rights of use and reuse, and on the ability to use the latest tools and services to organize and manipulate text and other content. Now, what this really is a recommendation that open access articles funded through article processing charges should be published under a Creative Commons license, and in particular the CC BY license, the most liberal of the Creative Commons licenses. And on this side, here are some more of the recommendations. You can see also there's a recommendation here that the infrastructure of subject and institutional repositories should be developed so that they complement formal publishing, and that funders should also be mindful that the length of embargo periods should be considered carefully to avoid undue risk to valuable journals, so that they are not funded in the main by APCs. So really saying to the funders, be careful if you make embargo periods too short for green open access, you really endanger the sustainability of those journals. So these 10 recommendations and the report have been accepted, and the policies are being implemented. Very shortly after the publication of the Finch report, the research councils in the UK announced a mandate. Now, just for those of you who don't know, the Research Councils UK, across all the disciplines collectively, these research councils really fund the greatest majority, I would say, of research that's carried out in the universities. So they are very, very important. So their mandate really states that all research outputs as a result of, resulting from their funding should be published in open access. And there is a great preference for gold open access. And the reason for the gold open access rather than green is that it is immediate and that it can have a CC BY license. Now, in this mandate, the Research Councils UK provided funding for, I think it was 33, I'm looking at Richard, you might know better, I think it was 33 institutions in the end. £17 million in the first year between those universities, that's this year, this academic year, and £20 million in year 2. And that funding for gold open access was based on an average article processing charge cost of £1,727 plus value added tax. Quite a lot of figures there, I know, but they become important later on as I talk you through this. So try and hold on to them, but I'll come back to them if necessary. And as I say, all these articles funded through the Research Councils UK block grant must be compliant by having a CC BY license. So there we go. So that happened in 2012. So a real huge game changer when you have central policies really having an enormous impact on scholarly publications. Another funder of research in the UK is the Wellcome Trust. And for many years, actually, the Wellcome Trust has had a policy of open access and has funded and has required that all research outputs from its funded research are open access. The other thing which is going on at the moment is that wasn't enough in the UK. The other thing that is going on at the moment is our Higher Education Funding Council in England, that's HEFGE, is also carrying out a consultation with universities and the wider stakeholders, publishers, about its policies for the Research Excellence Framework in 2020. Now, this is a huge exercise that happens every few years in the UK, where all universities have to submit their publications, conference proceedings, monographs, and so on, outputs of their research. And that review really establishes how much funding they're going to get in the next period. So it's a very, very important exercise for universities. But the consultation going on at the moment is really HEFGE saying, for 2020, for the Research Excellence Framework, we want all outputs funded by that council also to be open access. And that applies not only to scholarly journals, but to conference proceedings as well. I do know that the Higher Education Funding Council in England also considered including monographs in that requirement, but decided that the landscape wasn't quite ready for a requirement for open access monographs. But you can see how thoroughly these policies are moving us in the UK to a situation where open access isn't a sort of theoretical option. It really is now day-to-day business and something we all have to get on with and implement as best we can. So, as I say, this is all about us in that landscape, in that fast-changing environment, as the Library Consortium, and how it is changing our role and the expectations of our members. So we have been consulting with our member libraries very closely and talking to them about their concerns in this new environment. Now, these are probably going to come as no surprise to you, but I'll just run through them. The universities are all very concerned about the cost of article processing charges. Now, as I said, the funding they have received is based on an average APC, or assumption of an average APC, of £1,727. But as you may be aware, many publishers charge, significantly more than that. So institutions are very worried that the funding that they have received is not sufficient to meet what will be the actual cost of the article processing charges. And I think in one of the presentations yesterday, I don't know if any of you went to it, on the cost of open access, that was a theme here that is being discussed as well. And there were some good examples of how, I'm not just talking about hybrid journals here, but in how open access journals, the cost of article processing charges has increased significantly over the past 5 years. Universities are also concerned about the long-term future of these funded mandates. Because of the way that government funding works in the UK, the research councils can only promise these 2 years of funding that I've mentioned, 17 million and then 20 million. They're not, because of government reviews and so on, able to make any longer term promises about what may be forthcoming. So the universities are worried that the grants from the funding councils may not be sufficient and may not continue. Of course, the other thing that concerns institutions is they want to be equitable and treat all their academics in the same way. And not all research is funded by the research councils, so they're also concerned that they'll be treating some academics differently from another. The smaller universities in particular are very concerned about the amount of funding that they have received. The smaller ones, understandably, have received less funding. And indeed, there are some universities which haven't received any funding at all. The top concern, and I'm going to come back to this in a moment, the very top concern for UK universities is the combined cost of subscriptions, maintaining subscriptions for content and meeting the cost of article processing charges. And everywhere I go, everybody I speak to, that is their major concern. They are also concerned about compliance. You'll remember I've said this requirement for the CC BY license. Now, what we have noticed this year, since the mandate began, was that a lot of authors are paying their article processing charge, or I should say their institution, the university is paying the charge, and then the article is being published, but not under a CC BY license, usually some other form of Creative Commons license. Now, I must say, I don't think this is by any means publishers trying to do anything naughty. It really is that authors are in a great deal of confusion about these new policies and tend to pick the wrong one. But there is a concern that the universities are paying their money for article processing charges only to find that the published article does not comply with the funder's mandates. So what do the universities want Jisc Collections as the library consortium to do? Really, their demands aren't too bad. They really want us to negotiate on the cost of article processing charges, and some want us to negotiate schemes that will reduce the overall cost. So with some publishers, we have negotiated and facilitated prepayment schemes where the university pays a block of money in advance against articles that will be published by authors in their university. Now, these types of schemes, and you may be familiar with some of them, I think the Wiley one, for example, is a very well-known one. Now, these schemes do offer really considerable discounts on the standard article processing charge, and they can be a very, very good deal. However, they are contentious in the UK. Some universities take a very pragmatic view. They want to save money on the article processing charges, and they're very keen for Jisc Collections to negotiate these types of deals. Other universities, on the other hand, don't like the idea of these prepaid packages. And really what they're worried about is getting into the open access version of the big deal. You know, they see these prepayments as another big deal and something that they'll have to maintain year after year after year. There are also some people in the UK who believe that these prepayment models disguise the true cost of the APCs. And they really want the researchers to see the cost of an article processing charge because they believe that authors will then shop around journals to find the cheapest article processing charge. I don't believe that myself, but that's what some people believe. So reduce the cost of APCs. Some people want us to do packages, others don't. But as I say, the combined cost of the APCs and subscriptions in hybrid open access journals is the big issue and the one that really gets all the attention. Now, this is quite a difficult area. And I do want to say I'm not talking about double dipping so much here. I'm talking about the impact on individual universities depending on their publishing profile. But just to go back to the double dipping, most publishers, the large publishers of hybrid journals, if you look at their websites, you will see that they very clearly state they have a no double dip policy. But in practice, what that means is that they reduce the cost, the list price of the journals as the amount of open access funded by APCs increases. Now, that really does not help the universities in the UK who are spending thousands and thousands of pounds additionally on article processing charges. It doesn't help them because, well, who pays the list price anyway? They're all locked in to long-term deals, and therefore for these adjustments really have no impact on those long-term deals. This is very much a problem for each institution depending on their research profile and how many articles from their authors are typically published with each publisher. So to give you an example, and this is one, a real live one, which I actually modelled, I had a look at. There is an institution which has a journal subscription for a package of journals, and it pays £20,000 per year for that journal package. That university's authors, between them, typically have published about 10 articles per year with that same publisher. Now, that publisher charges £2,000 per APC. So you can see that 10 times 2,000 APCs, £20,000. So £20,000 on APCs, plus they have to maintain the £20,000 for their journal subscription. So that institution's expenditure with that publisher more than doubles under Gold Open Access. Now, of course, when we think about that Finch report and when it was talking about the cost of big deals reducing over time, that really assumes that the rest of the world follows in a Gold Open Access policy. But it isn't quite important to remember for the UK scholarly outputs account for about 6% of all research outputs across the world. And I think at the moment, without the UK mandates, many publishers say that they only publish 1 or 2%, hybrid publishers, I should say, of course, only publish 1 or 2% of articles anyway in gold. So you can see, at the most, if you have just the UK, you may be around 7 to 8% of a journals, obviously it will vary from journal to journal, but typically only 7 to 8% of a publisher's output being in Gold Open Access. So we cannot see very quickly the need to maintain subscribed content would disappear. So our biggest challenge and the biggest call from our universities is Library Consortium, please do something about the cost of maintaining article processing charges and subscription charges. No challenge. So there we go. The other thing that we are working on, and I mentioned to you, is this ensuring compliance. And this is very much about workflow, I think. And the Research Council's mandate really happened very, very quickly. It's taken universities by surprise. It's taken publishers by surprise. And there really isn't an infrastructure there, particularly in the hybrid environment, to support this new mandate. So authors get get very confused about the license they should choose. And fair enough, publishers are not there to tell authors which license they should use. But quite a bit of work we have been doing is talking to publishers about how they can amend their workflow when an author is accepted to help them choose the correct license so that they are complying with their funders' mandates. The other thing that all of our universities want us to help with, and indeed the funders as well, is the overall cost of this transition to gold open access. We really need to develop the systems and infrastructure to gather the data. It's quite difficult at the moment to really get a handle on how much money is being spent with each publisher on APCs, how many articles are being published in open access and so on. So really there is a real need for data, but also a need to use some of that data to model the impact of the change to this compliance with these models. We need to model what's happening. We need to understand the financial implications so that we can enter into meaningful and evidence-based discussions with the publisher, and so that we can plan for the future. And also, our universities are asking for help in making efficient and accurate payments to the publishers for APCs. Now, you can imagine you have a world where suddenly nearly all your research outputs have to be funded, have to have article processing charges. In the UK, mostly it's the library that's responsible for managing that money. We are talking about departments of people needed to handle so many invoices for so many articles, particularly in the large research-intensive universities. One university I was talking to the other day was telling me that the processing of one invoice for one APC across the university, by the time it had touched people in the library, people in the finance team and so on, they'd resolve various queries with the publishers, etc. That was 5 hours for one invoice. So you can see that if you scale that up and you have many hundreds of these to process, it's quite a burden and quite a cost, not only for the universities, but also for the publishers as well, because they also have to process all these individual payments. I think for the fully open access publishers, this isn't such a problem because they've grown up that way. They have the systems in place. For the hybrid journals, it's much more of a challenge because they don't have the infrastructure in place to deal with it. One of the things we have been doing, and I must say one of the most complicated projects I've ever been involved in, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but it's a good experience, is is our JISC APC pilot. And we are seeing if it is possible, as a library consortium, to provide a platform that will help in that management of making all these APC charges, and really to see if we can reduce administration by developing such a shared service. Now, it's not a given that we would, sometimes you put an intermediary in place and there can actually just be another thing to do in the workflow. So we really have to test it out to make sure that such a shared service would really provide efficiencies to the sector. And also, it is a way of seeing if we can provide that sort of data that the universities and the funders want. So we have worked with OAK, some of you may know Open Access Key, as a technology partner, and we are trialling our JISC article processing charge platform. I think we know more about handling article processing charges than anyone else in the world right now. And it's not easy. There is a lot of work involved. But perhaps that's, our pilot runs until next July, so I could probably tell you more about that then. So, looking ahead as a library consortium, as I say, open access, integration into normal life. It's here with us, we're living it, we're breathing it. It's what we've all got to get on with. I was talking to some publishers yesterday, I think, in the corridor, and they were saying, oh, my goodness, you know, the take-up of the mandate seems to be quite slow. Well, you know, the university only got their money in April, so it really is early days. But take-up will expand very quickly, and the impact will be felt very quickly. The other thing, as I say, that we are doing is we are modelling the financial impact. We have theoretical data, but we have live data that we're gathering at the moment. And certainly, even though compliance with the mandate isn't at 100% yet, and it's not expected to be at 100%, it's very early days. But already we can see that the financial impact is quite significant. And that modelling, of course, is just looking at the cost of the APCs and the maintaining subscriptions. It's not including all the cost of administration. And we are looking to find ways to work with publishers to make this a sustainable model. And I would say there are a couple of publishers who really have, I think, led the way and come up with some very interesting ideas that are exceedingly helpful, and I commend them most highly for it. Some of you may be familiar with the Royal Society of Chemistry's Gold for Gold model. And this model really helps because it links article processing charges directly to subscriptions. What happens is that the institution receives vouchers to cover the cost of article processing charges in the RSC journals. Yeah, I think that point is they have to take the whole package, the whole RSC package. But if you take that, you get one voucher per £1,600 worth of subscription value. Now that really does help and really makes the whole thing much more sustainable. Another publisher I would mention is Sage. There's somebody from Sage in the audience, isn't there? Hello. Who again I think are being very imaginative and flexible. They've done, and in fact I helped host one of the round tables for Sage, where they really went out of their way to listen to institutions, their concerns and their problems. And for those institutions that subscribe to the For Sage package, they are offering a considerable discount on their standard article processing charge. Oh, yes, I beg your pardon. Sorry, I'm sorry, actually, I meant to edit that out. Yes, Nestle 2 is our name for our negotiations with the journal publishers. So when we say a Nestle 2 institution, it means an institution that subscribes to Sage through our negotiated agreement. So apologies for that. I should have edited that out. But thank you, Anthony, for reminding me. So I think these are two models that we would very much hope to see other publishers embracing. Now, they are quite high-risk models for publishers in some ways, because, again, it is early days. They don't know what the take-up is. But I think these models, which acknowledge the subscription income and the money spent on article processing charges and link them together, are very helpful in this transitional period. Much more helpful, I would say, than a small percentage decrease on the list price of the journal. So this is really what we hope to see. Just say that again in case anyone missed it. So there we are. So I hope, oh, sorry, I've got another slide here. Yes, so as I say, and the universities are very, very pleased to see those different types of approaches, and very much welcome models, even if they're pilot models for the odd years, so we can experiment to see what works best for both universities and for publishers. So I think we're in for a very interesting time. As I said, this is very new. We only got really began on this year, but you can see there is a great deal of work to be done, and the role of the Library Consortium in supporting that is really quite extensive. So I think, Anthony, I'm sorry, I've finished. Is that all right?
Questions. I will ask a question first, then. There are the usual microphones there. And my question is as follows. As many people know, Professor Harnad has been probably the greatest apostle of open access over the years. And he is very upset and cross about the gold model being encouraged by the British government. His argument is, if everybody put their accepted version in the repositories, there will be a much quicker route to complete open access, and that the messing around, as he would say, with gold is actually holding back total open access. Now, I wonder how this is particular view of this very esteemed person, not by me, I point out quickly, has impacted on your work and on the attitude of the universities and so on.
Well, I think very much the impact on our work. I think, Anthony, when I was mentioning the consternation we have around these prepayment deals for article processing charges, I think they have been seen by some, as I say, as very welcome, some universities, but others, and particularly those who really look forward to a much sort of more greener route, as I say, feel that they disguise the true problem, and that really, if researchers actually see the cost of APCs, gold wouldn't be the favoured route, or that they would shop around for a better deal. So I think that's the way we as a library consortium have felt it most. But I don't know, maybe there are some publishers in the room who might want to answer that question, Anthony.
Now, any publishers in the room who would like to say something, or any librarians in the room who have any thoughts? No? Well, I'm going to ask a second question in that case, until you think about a question. And my second question is this. I am actually an academic, sort of. I'm not unfamiliar with the feelings of academics, especially as I've been interviewing them, and they're very, very worried about the whole business, because they feel they're being compelled to do something which they don't want or never voted for, as it were. Now, the thing that will really get them, that they don't really know yet, is some of the policies of the libraries, it's not the library's fault. The libraries have been forced into administering the APCs. And some of the libraries have decided that the only really sensible way of doing this is to dole out the money to people who apply to them who have got the approval of their heads of department. Now, if you know the academic community, the head of department is the most loathed person for everybody apart from the immediate acolytes. And I think there's going to be a problem, because there's going to be no standardization about the way the funds are being administered. It's rather like the laws in the US about the franchise in the different states. It's the same sort of thing in the libraries. But what about that?
Well, I would say that this has been a real problem, and I think It is a real problem. And as I say, in the UK, it is usually the library that is administering these funds for article processing charges. And I think, Anthony, I would say, the librarians that I have spoken to are all very concerned as well. I didn't put it on my top concerns, but I should have perhaps mentioned it. Are all very concerned about academic freedom. And I have not met one librarian who wants to be in the position of saying to an academic, no, you cannot publish in the journal of your choice because we have run out of money. Or you cannot publish in the journal of your choice because we think that article processing charge is too much. I think the libraries are really struggling with this, and this is why they're concerned that the funding they have isn't sufficient. So what do they do at the point of the year when their block grant for APCs has run out? What is their response, you know, after their funding's run out, but before the end of the year, to the next academic that wants to come along and to publish and comply with the mandate. So that is a real concern, and a real concern that they may be seen to be interfering with academic freedom. It is a real tension, and as I say, none of them want to be in that role. You know, they don't want to in any way interfere with academic freedom.
No, I mean, I totally agree with you about that. I mean, I'm not suggesting for a second that libraries, it's just very difficult for them.
It is. It's not a pleasant position to be in, the keeper of that money.
What about Hazel asking a question? I know you know such a lot about this stuff. Well, okay. I'm doing my best. Let me see if I can spot somebody down here who might want to say something. Because I think there's a lot to come out of this. So, yeah, oh, look, a good and nice person.
I'm Mark England from the University of Utah, and I was just wondering what the thoughts are in the UK about being put in a position where they, and you addressed it a little bit, but about being in a position where their research dollars are potentially being impacted sort of unfairly with regard to the rest of the world, because they're been placed out ahead of everybody else.
Good question, if I may say so, Mark.
Yes, a good question. Well, it's quite a difficult one to answer. I mean, as I say, there are many stakeholders involved in this whole process. You know, the funders, the universities, the publishers, and so on. I think. You know, I mean, it is difficult to generalize. I mean, I think a lot of academics do think, oh my goodness, you know, what's all this about? They really are not very keen on it. They just want to get on with their job, publish as they normally do, and really find it quite a nuisance and quite a fuss. And I'm sure they would have thought, well, that 17 million this year or that 20 million next year, you know, could have been spent on research rather than research outputs. But, you know, but there are other people clearly who you know think it's a good thing. So it is difficult to generalise, and I wouldn't want to say there was a view, you know, across the UK, especially as there are so many stakeholders. And also, I think you have to bear in mind as well, this policy applies, as I said at the beginning, to all disciplines. So it's not just you know, STEM subjects. It's humanities and social sciences as well that have to comply with this mandate. So again, I think you'll find a lot of disciplinary differences in terms of the way that people are responding. You know, people in biomedicine and so on who are used to open access publishing in fully open access journals really probably doesn't make much difference to them. But if you're a social scientist or, you know, you're in the humanities, it's probably a bit of a drag.
And another question here.
Sorry. Oh.
Yes, I mean, I can only speak to the U.S. context, you know, and I get to engage with faculty because I serve on certain committees and take part in certain events. And, you know, the general impression I have is that faculty who are well established, they see open access as a noble enterprise, something, you know, they can kind of, you know, demonstrate their generosity to the world. But then higher, I guess, some of the administrators and the younger faculty, they're not so open to the idea because, you know, they're very much concerned about their career, getting established, getting to that point. And you know, I share that. I see that also with the in humanities professors and social sciences. They don't really want their stuff just out there for others. They're very protective of their material. Do you have any advice to give to librarians working in the U.S. to convince administrators as well as younger faculty?
Yeah, I don't have any advice myself to give, but I think if you look at the some of the universities have done a very, very good job in advocacy, talking to their academics and so on about this, because it really, you know, it really is very complicated to implement. And I think a lot of UK universities have information on their websites, you know, that could completely open, you'd be able to see it, to their academics about how to comply with the policies and, you know, general advocacy sorts of materials. And I know a lot of, you know, well, I'm sure most, all of them, but I know intimately some of them have worked very hard at the advocacy, trying to make this a smooth implementation. And particularly, as you say, with those early career academics, people in the humanities and social science who, you know, clearly because of their disciplines and the types of journals they're publishing in, you know, do find it quite a threatening environment.
They're also very worried about the CCBY license in the humanities. They find that very, very worrying.
Yes, they are.
It's Richard Geddy from STM.
Hello, Richard.
I'm thinking about your statement, the problem that might arise if, before the year is out, the library APC fund has run out. And I'm wondering two things. Firstly, to what extent, if you have run out of money, is it possible to comply with the Research Council and HEFKey mandates via green option? To how many journals would that apply to? And as a second question, I wonder whether librarians may well decide that if they get a request for an APC for publication in a journal for which is gold but has an acceptable green mandate, they may refuse the APC because they want to save it up for, say, the humanities people who have less options. That's
a real possibility, I think.
Yes, thank you. I didn't go into this too much in my presentation because it is very complicated. The Research Council's UK policy, while it has this very strong preference for gold open access, does recognise it may not always be possible for a researcher to have the funds, for whatever reason, or be able to pay for pay an APC. So it has a sort of decision tree which says, well, if you can't pay to have your article made open access immediately, you know, maybe the journal doesn't have that option or there is no money for it, then there are various other options that they can go along on the green route where they can publish as long as after a certain embargo period the article becomes open. So that is a bit of a complicated thing. It is possible. But I think that is confusing as well for academics, Richard, because while they have those options, I think they're struggling to understand them. I'm not surprised either. If anyone wants to be confused, you can look on the Research Council's UK website and see the decision tree. But I think as well, you know, that point about you know, the saving the money for the humanities or social sciences academics might be a good point, because clearly there probably are more options in a way for the STM in the STM journals for the delayed gold open access. And there is a very good, JISC funds a very good service called Sherpa Romeo, and that has a tool called FACT, I think, Sherpa Romeo FACT, which actually helps the academics understand which journals, you know, will enable them to comply with the various funder mandates, whether they go the gold or the green route. But you can imagine it is all quite complicated.
There's a question in the back. I want just to make one additional remark to this, which has just occurred to me, but I know it is happening. If you talk to somebody from Biomed Central, is Bob Schatz here, actually, or anybody? No. They will tell you that they've built up quite a big list of journals, all of them being funded. Where does the money come from? Well, the money comes from out of the grants people have got to do their research. People either ask for the money to publishing charges, or they just hold back a little bit of money ascribed to materials. The trouble, of course, is this runs out, but it does mean there's quite a bit of money swirling around there, which is already being used for open access publishing. That's fair, isn't it?
I think so, yes.
Yeah. Now, the gentleman at the back, please, and give your name, please, if you would.
Bob Persing, University of Pennsylvania. I'm wondering if there's a simpler way we can do this. As I understand it, the British Labour Party has said that if they win the next general election, they will simply freeze all energy prices for 2 years by fiat. I was wondering if you could get them to do something similar for APCs, freeze them, or as I understand it, they said nothing about how they're funding that freeze.
Well, we could try, couldn't we?
I think the one is as likely as the other to actually happen.
I think you're right, but I like the idea of trying.
Yeah.
Yes,
There
yes.
is a problem with the APC pricing, though, because if you look at there's a difference in the cost, or should be a difference in the cost, between journals which have a high rejection rate and those that don't, because, of course, the processing is so much greater. Now, this is a problem put forward at the very beginning of open access journals, and the suggestion would should be submission charges. Then that would be much easier. But unfortunately, this has never happened. Nobody's ever dared to do it. Maybe they have now. There's so many new models coming out. But it means that if Biomed Central journals, the top level ones, are as expensive in terms of payment as the large commercial publishers, and yet at the same time Biomed Central is not carrying print as well.
But if we're saying that the administrative costs of doing all the APCs are a great burden, think of the administrative costs for all the submissions that get rejected.
So another question over there. I'll bring up, or perhaps it's better if you go to the microphone so we can all see you then. Name, please.
Something that strikes
Could you
me-
give your name, sorry.
Robin Champeau from Oregon Health and Science University. I mean, something that's very striking to me, and I'd love some feedback on it, is that, you know, we're talking about open access and open access mandates, and our conversations are concentrating on the cost and how complex it is. And we haven't talked about the benefits, the innovation, the reproducibility, the reuse that this facilitates. And it scares me a little bit that that's now what we're talking about, and especially in the UK. And that makes almost open access potentially more confusing and less attractive to scholars. I mean, it's...
Well, yes. I would say, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, I was really giving you the view of the library consortium and what we're hearing and what the concerns are. And of course, because we are the library consortium, charged generally with negotiating better prices and so on, the focus is around the money. But clearly, we do have a government who very much believes in the open agenda and the benefits of open access, and that's really where this came from, and where the Finch, review came from, was that desire to have research outputs, openly available for the benefits of society and business. So I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I don't want you to think, in the UK we all spend our time, moaning about money and the cost of everything. It just comes out very strongly in this presentation. So,
Yeah, I think the thing is that the minister responsible for pushing through this program is actually an unusual example of an intelligent politician who has really coherent views. And even publishers can't escape the fact that he has a definitely intelligent view. Okay? I think that's right. So it's quite an unusual situation. Now, he fully understands the benefits of reuse and so forth, and puts it forward as all opportunities. So it's really a major plank in his problem. It's just that the implementation is so messy. Yeah, indeed. It is. Yeah, it's because you have to pay money out, and academics are not used to having to pay, and quite rightly, none of us we're used to having to pay for these things, and so they don't in the UK, unless they publish in the US journal. There are no page charges in the UK, never have been, or in Canada, I believe. It's just a special US thing, and it's mostly society journals as well. Not in the UK at all. Admittedly, there are journals that do color charges, or used to do, but probably not so many, and special charges when you have too many pages. But it's a special, that's where we don't have that page charge problem. I mean, it's mentioned all the time, I know. It's fair enough in the US. It's terrible. I know. Yeah, and then they don't like it. Yeah, they did, because they used to get special grants from the Royal Society and so on. My wife used to do this. So, you must get it. Personal conversation. So, yeah, I agree entirely with what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, well, we've got to stop now because it is time.
It is time.
Thank you, Elaine.
Well, thank you all very much for listening. Thank you.